Do not be afraid, just have faith. That is the statement what Jesus said to Jairus after people from his home came to report that Jairus' daughter was in fact dead. They told Jairus not to bother Jesus any longer because the sick girl had passed on. There was no longer a need for healing. Perhaps all these people were the ones who needed the healing. They obviously lacked faith in what Jesus could do. In other words, they had doubt that Jesus could do anything at this point. They were afraid that Jesus could not bring the girl back to life. So how much this simple statement tells us about the people around Jairus and possibly many people today. Jairus did not believe Jesus could bring his daughter back until Jesus did. Jairus had to see it to believe it, just as Thomas had to touch Jesus' wounds to believe it was really him when Jesus appeared to the apostles after the resurrection. Once Jairus' daughter was up and walking, Jairus believed. And it makes sense, because when we find out that the meaning of Jairus' name is God enlightens. Once Jesus brought Jairus' daughter back to life, Jairus believed. He was enlightened in the faith. Since his name meant that he would be enlightened by God, then it stood to reason that he would see and believe this miracle. So how can we all not be afraid and have faith? Well, we all have our doubts. It's only natural to have doubts. However, we normally don't have doubts when there are things that we can see or feel or hear or touch or smell. For example, food is something that we all use our senses on. When we shop for the food, we feel the fruits and the vegetables for freshness. We take it home and cook the food, and we can smell the aromas it gives off. And then we usually eat with family or friends, and the others see us eating this food. This is why Jesus, after raising the girl from the dead, told her parents to give her something to eat. Jesus wanted them to have no doubt that she was the real person, not a ghost. That, too, is why Jesus took food to eat when he appeared to the apostles after his resurrection. He wanted them to have no doubt that he was real, that he was being there with them, that him being there with them was no illusion, it was no dream. Jesus wanted to make sure that their faith in his resurrection after his death was solid. They had to go out and preach the word that Jesus rose, and that we too will rise and be with God after this life. There could be no wavering in this belief. They had to preach what they believed. Their faith had to be strong and it had to be mature. However, doubting is very common in all of us. We may ask ourselves questions like, is it possible that I can be a good parent? Or do I have the talent I need to succeed in this job? Or am I strong enough to get through this illness? Doubt is normal. It's human. And that's why it's part of all of us. But faith that comes from God, it's everything that God reveals to us by way of Scripture or tradition in our church. So it's more than what we can possibly know by our limiting experiences through our five senses. Yet, if we're willing, if we're accepting, we can put it into practice every single day of our lives. And this practicing of faith will allow us to grow in maturity in our faith for that enlightenment in God. This enlightenment will allow us to be sustained through the toughest times. And this was shown, I think, contrasted in two examples we saw this week. The families of those shooting victims in Charleston, South Carolina, experienced it firsthand when they saw the man via video hookup who had killed some of their family members. One of the women, a daughter of one of whose mother was shot by this man, said that she wanted to forgive him and for God to have mercy on his soul. She said it with strength and compassion. She said she would never be able to hold her mother or see her mother again, and yet she had the faith to ask God for these things for this man. The conviction in her words and stature concerning her loved one was something that only an enlightened person could offer to that tragic, hopeless young man. In contrast, another tragic young man gave his apology to the families he damaged. Dzhokhar Zarnev, now known as the Boston Bomber, gave his apology in court this week. However, one man who had a family member killed in the blast said he thought Zarnev's apology was without regret, was without meaning. It was just plain too late. It meant nothing at all. We have to wonder why the difference in these responses. Both acts had the same evil forethought. Could it have been the place where the act occurred? In a church versus at a marathon? If we believe God is everywhere, then that shouldn't matter. Could it have been whether the person was wealthy or poor? Well, we don't exactly know, but I don't think either of them or any of them were extremely wealthy or extremely poor. So let's go back to our gospel about Jairus and his situation. We know he was wealthy. He was leader of the synagogue. And he took a leap of faith that Jesus would heal his daughter. But what about a person with little financial means taking that same leap of faith that Jesus could heal? Remember the paralytic who on his mat was lowered down through a hole in the roof so that Jesus could heal him. So it doesn't seem that finances can be a reason for that either. It could be that when we talk about the poor, we're talking about the poor in spirit. Being poor in spirit seems to be the ones who need that enlightenment and faith. It seems that both men who committed these evil acts were poor in spirit. I suppose if they were not poor in spirit, they quite possibly would not have done what they did. So with enlightenment, not only comes that inward healing, but the outward acts as well. We can all recognize this enlightenment, this faith in people. We just need to keep our hearts and our eyes open. By recognizing this faith in one another, it will help us grow in our own faith. And we never know how strong that faith will be until we too are faced with such adversity. You could say faith is like potatoes. It is unseen until the harvest. My prayer for everyone here is that our harvests are bountiful.